"Step away from my car," Clara said, not raising her voice, not lowering the phone from her ear. The words landed flat, practiced, like something she had said before and expected to be obeyed. The late afternoon sun bounced off the polished hood of the black sedan, throwing a sharp glare across the concrete. Malik stood with one hand resting on the edge of the open utility van beside him, a folded rag draped over his fingers, a faint line of grease across his knuckles. For half a second, he did not move. Not frozen, just paused. The hum of a nearby generator filled the gap. Somewhere across the lot, a cart rattled over uneven pavement, then slowed, then stopped. Malik shifted his weight back, one heel scraping lightly against the ground, and stepped away from the sedan without a word. His eyes lifted briefly, not quite meeting hers, then dropped to the reflection of the sky on the car's surface as if checking for something there instead. Clara paced once along the driver's side, heels striking in even, controlled beats, her gaze flicking to the door handle, then to the faint smudge where his shadow had been. "I do not need help," she added into the phone, though it was unclear who she meant. Her free hand hovered near the door, not touching it yet. Malik adjusted the rag in his hand, folding it once, then again, more precisely this time. The motion was small, contained. He turned slightly toward his van, but did not walk away fully, leaving a few feet of space between himself and the sedan, enough to be out of reach, not enough to disappear. A security guard by the entrance glanced over, then quickly looked back down at his tablet, tapping the screen with unnecessary focus. The air felt tighter than the heat should allow. Clara finally opened the car door, a clean click, and leaned in just enough to check the interior. Her eyes moved quickly, scanning, efficient. She straightened, closed the door with a controlled push, then wiped her fingertips lightly against each other as if clearing something unseen. Malik's jaw shifted once, barely noticeable, as he exhaled through his nose. He picked up a small wrench from the van's edge, turned it in his hand, then set it back down without using it. The metal made a soft, dull sound against the tray. Clara stepped around the front of the car, stopping just long enough to cast another look in his direction. Not a question, not curiosity, just confirmation. "Maintenance," she said, this time not into the phone. Malik gave a single nod. No explanation, no correction, just the acknowledgement. A breeze cut through the lot, lifting the edge of his shirt slightly, carrying the faint scent of oil and hot asphalt. He reached for the van door and pulled it halfway closed, then stopped, leaving it angled open. His body turned just enough to signal he was returning to work. Clara turned away first, already speaking again, already moving on, her voice fading into the sharp echo of her steps against the concrete as the space between them settled back into silence. Malik eased the van door the rest of the way closed, the latch catching with a soft click that sounded louder than it should have. He stood there a moment, fingers still on the handle, then slid his hand down to the seam of the metal, wiping away a thin line of dust with the edge of his palm. The sun had shifted just enough to throw a narrow strip of light across the ground between him and the sedan, cutting the space into two uneven halves. He stepped back into the shade without looking up. The generator's hum settled into a steady rhythm again, filling the edges of the lot. From the glass doors, someone pushed through with a stack of folders, paused mid-step as if considering the scene, then kept walking, slower this time. Malik reached into the van and picked up a coiled extension cable, letting it drop once to loosen the twist before looping it over his forearm. The motion was deliberate, measured, each turn aligned neatly. He drew in a breath through his nose, held it for a beat, then let it out as he tightened the last loop. Clara's voice carried faintly across the lot, clipped and even, already on a different subject. She did not look back. Malik shifted his stance, repositioning the cable into the compartment, adjusting it until it sat flat. For a second, his gaze drifted toward the sedan's rear window, catching only the reflection of sky and passing clouds. He blinked once, then turned his shoulder fully toward his work, reaching for the next tool as if the moment had already been filed away, though the air around it had not quite settled. By the time Malik pulled out of the lot, the light had softened into that late afternoon haze that blurred the edges of buildings and stretched shadows across the road. The van rattled once as it hit a shallow dip near the exit, then settled into a steady hum. He drove with one hand resting low on the wheel, the other draped over the gear shift, fingers loose, not gripping. Traffic was light. A few cars ahead, brake lights flickered on and off without urgency. He kept a steady distance, neither closing the gap nor falling behind. At a red light, he leaned forward slightly, adjusting the vent with 2 fingers until the airflow angled toward the windshield instead of his face. The movement was small, precise. He sat back again, eyes forward. The light turned green. He did not accelerate right away, just a half-second pause before easing into motion. When he reached his street, the pavement changed texture, rougher, patched in places where old repairs had sunk unevenly. The van rolled slower here. A basketball bounced somewhere out of sight, the rhythm irregular, followed by a child's voice calling out, then laughter that echoed briefly between the houses. Malik turned into a narrow driveway beside a 2-story building with faded siding. He cut the engine but did not get out immediately. His hand remained on the key for a moment, thumb resting against the worn edge of the plastic. Then he released it, reached over to the passenger seat, and picked up a small paper bag folded neatly at the top. Inside, the corner of a sandwich wrapper peeked out. He stepped out, closing the door with a careful push until it clicked without echo. The front steps creaked under his weight as he climbed them, shifting slightly to the side where the wood felt more solid. Inside, the apartment held the quiet of late afternoon. Sunlight filtered through thin curtains, casting soft lines across the floor. A small backpack lay near the couch, one strap twisted under itself. Malik set the paper bag on the counter and walked over, crouching to straighten the strap, smoothing it flat with his palm before lifting the bag and placing it on the seat cushion. From down the hall, a door opened. "Daddy," a small voice called, still thick with sleep. Malik stood, turning his head just enough to answer without raising his voice. In here, his daughter, Lila, appeared in the hallway, rubbing one eye with the back of her hand, her hair pressed unevenly on one side. She paused when she saw him, then walked forward, slower than usual, her steps soft against the floor. Malik reached for a glass on the counter, filled it halfway with water, and held it out to her before she asked. She took it with both hands, sipping, then lowering it carefully, watching the water line as if measuring it. He waited until she finished before taking the glass back and setting it in the sink. "You eat?" he asked. She shook her head slightly. He opened the paper bag, unfolding the top with quiet care, and slid the sandwich onto a plate. He cut it in half without rushing, aligning the edges before pressing the knife down. Lila climbed onto the chair, tucking one leg under herself as she reached for a half. Malik leaned against the counter, not sitting, just resting his weight there as he watched her take the first bite. The room stayed quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the soft rustle of paper as he folded the wrapper into a smaller square. His gaze drifted once toward the window, catching the reflection of the sky shifting toward evening. For a brief moment, his jaw tightened, then eased as he exhaled slowly through his nose. He pushed off the counter, walked to the sink, and rinsed the knife, running his thumb along the flat of the blade to clear a crumb before setting it to dry. When he turned back, Lila had already taken another bite, more certain this time. Malik nodded once, almost to himself, and reached for a towel to wipe down the counter, moving in steady, even strokes as the light in the room softened around them. The next morning came with a cooler light, thinner, stretching across the parking lot in long pale strips that had not yet been broken by midday heat. Malik parked the van in nearly the same spot, aligning the front wheel with a faint crack in the concrete, as if the position mattered. He cut the engine, gathered his tools without rush, and stepped out into the quiet hum of early activity. The building's glass facade reflected a washed sky, and for a moment, his reflection overlapped with it before he turned away. A delivery truck idled near the far end, its engine low and constant. 2 employees crossed the lot, voices muted, their conversation tapering off as they passed. Malik moved toward the maintenance cart station near the side entrance, adjusting the strap of his tool bag once on his shoulder before setting it down. He checked the contents one by one, not because he needed to, but because the sequence held steady. Wrench, tester, gloves. Each returned to its place with a soft, measured sound. The door behind him opened with a brief rush of conditioned air. Clara stepped out, already in motion, her pace unbroken as she crossed into the open space. She did not look at him directly, not at first. Her attention moved across the lot in a quick, controlled sweep, taking in vehicles, movement, distances. Malik felt it without turning. His hand paused over the tester for a fraction of a second, then resumed, placing it back into the tray. He shifted the cart a few inches to the right, clearing a wider path along the curb, then straightened. Clara slowed as she approached her car, not stopping, just reducing pace enough to alter the rhythm of the space around her. The delivery truck engine cut off mid-idle, leaving a brief vacuum of sound that made every small movement more distinct. A car door closed somewhere behind Malik, sharper than usual. He stepped back from the cart, giving the open stretch of pavement a cleaner line, his position angled away from her without fully retreating. Clara reached her vehicle, her hand resting lightly on the roof before sliding down to the door handle. She opened it halfway, then paused, standing just outside the frame of the door. Her gaze shifted, not fully turning, but enough to place him within it. Malik adjusted the cuff of his glove, pulling it snug against his wrist, then pressed his palm once against the side of the cart as if checking its balance. He did not move toward her. He did not move away. The distance held. A man exiting the building slowed near the steps, his eyes flicking between them before settling on his phone, thumb scrolling without focus. The air felt thinner, quieter, as if the lot itself had narrowed. Clara leaned slightly into the car, reaching for something inside, then straightened again, closing the door with a controlled motion. She remained there a moment longer than needed, her presence anchoring the space. Malik turned his head just enough to glance toward the row of vehicles behind her, then back to his cart, lifting a small cloth and folding it along its worn creases. He placed it on the edge of the tray, aligned with the tools. His breathing stayed even, but slower now, each inhale measured, each exhale steady. Clara stepped away from the car, her path taking her across the front of the vehicle and closer to where he stood. Not toward him directly, but near enough that the line between their spaces blurred. She stopped briefly, adjusting the strap of her bag on her shoulder, her posture straight, composed. The pause drew the attention of a passing assistant, who hesitated mid-step before continuing on, heels tapping lightly against the pavement. Malik shifted his stance, one foot angling back half an inch, opening the space without signaling retreat. He reached for the handle of the cart and rolled it forward just enough to reposition it along the curb, the wheels turning with a soft, rubbered sound. The movement was small, but it changed the geometry between them, giving her a clear, unobstructed path. Clara resumed walking without acknowledgement, her pace returning to its earlier rhythm as she moved past. The sounds of the lot slowly returned to normal, the distant engine restarting, voices rising slightly. Malik stood for a second longer, hand still on the cart handle, then released it and bent to pick up a coiled cable from the lower shelf. He lifted it, adjusted the loops once, and began unwinding it with careful, even pulls, the tension in the line. Easing out gradually as the morning settled into motion around him, Malik worked the cable loose from its last tight loop, feeding it out along the curb in a straight line that followed the edge of the lot. The rubber dragged softly against the concrete, catching once on a shallow groove before slipping free. He crouched to guide it, pressing it flat with the side of his palm so it would not twist back on itself. A service door opened behind him, and a facilities supervisor stepped out, pausing just long enough to scan the setup. "Power's been cutting out on level 2, the man said, not loudly, but with the kind of tone that carried expectation more than urgency. Malik gave a small nod without looking up, tracing the cable with his eyes as he aligned it toward the access panel mounted on a short pillar near the parking base. The panel door hung slightly ajar, its hinge worn enough to let it drift an inch open on its own. He stood, wiped his fingers against the cloth tucked at his side, and walked the remaining length, testing the weight of the cable as he went. A few feet away, a pair of employees slowed near the walkway, their conversation thinning into silence as they watched him reach the panel. One of them shifted her bag from one shoulder to the other, eyes lingering a second longer than needed before she looked away. Malik set the cable end down on the concrete, then pulled the panel door fully open with 2 fingers, steadying it so it would not swing back. Inside, the breakers were labeled in fading marker, some numbers crossed out and rewritten at angles. He leaned in slightly, reading, not rushing the sequence. Behind him, the rhythm of footsteps changed. Clara had stopped again, this time not near her car, but a few yards closer, her position just off his right shoulder. She did not speak. She did not need to. The space adjusted around her, subtle but noticeable, like a shift in pressure. The supervisor glanced between them, then stepped back half a pace, hands resting on his hips, waiting. Malik's hand hovered over the panel for a brief moment, not searching, just holding position as if letting the order settle into place. He reached into his tool bag and took out a small tester, turning it once in his hand before pressing it against the line. A faint beep confirmed the current. He moved to the next point, repeating the motion, each step deliberate, identical in rhythm. The cable at his feet lay straight, uncoiled, a clean line cutting across the ground. A car pulled in at the far end of the lot, its engine idling lower than before, as if the driver had eased off without realizing it. Malik shifted his stance, one knee bending slightly as he adjusted his angle to the panel, keeping his shoulders square to the work. He did not glance back. Clara's presence stayed fixed, not moving closer, not stepping away. Just there. The supervisor cleared his throat once, a small sound that did not turn into words. Malik set the tester down on the edge of the panel and reached for a different tool, a flathead screwdriver with a worn handle. He fitted into the slot, turned it slowly, feeling the resistance before giving it a measured push. The metal clicked into place with a muted sound. He paused again, not long, just enough to check the alignment, then continued. The employees near the walkway had stopped completely now, their attention held without intention. One of them adjusted her stance, heel lifting and settling again as if unsure whether to stay or move on. The lot seemed to narrow around the small circle of action, the background noise thinning to a low, steady layer. Malik ran the back of his wrist lightly across his forehead, more out of habit than heat, then repositioned the screwdriver on the next slot. His breathing stayed even, but slower than before, each movement measured against it. Clara shifted her weight once, the faint sound of her heel against the concrete marking the change. Malik's hand paused mid-turn for a fraction of a second, then resumed, finishing the adjustment without altering pace. The panel door creaked slightly as a breeze caught it, and he steadied it again with his elbow, keeping it open at the same angle. He reached down, lifted the cable end, and connected it to the port, pressing it in until it seated with a soft, firm click. For a moment, nothing changed. Then a low hum built. Beneath the surface, subtle but present, running through the line and into the panel. The overhead lights along the level 2 ramp flickered once, then steadied, their glow evening out across the concrete. The supervisor let out a quiet breath, not quite relief, more a release of held attention. Malik did not turn to acknowledge it. He checked the connection again, fingers pressing lightly against the casing, confirming it held. The eyes around him remained for a second longer, then began to drift away, conversations picking back up in low tones, footsteps resuming their earlier rhythm. Clara stayed where she was for a beat beyond that, her gaze still directed toward the panel, toward his hands, before she finally shifted, turning slightly as if to leave, but not yet taking the step. Malik reached for the cloth on the edge of the cart and wiped his hands once, slow and even, then folded it back along its crease and set it down in the same place as before, the line of it straight against the metal tray. He closed the panel door with a careful push, holding it until the latch caught, then let his hand rest there for a brief second before releasing it. The hum of the lot returned in full, engines, voices, distant movement, filling the space that had held still around him. He picked up the tester, placed it back into his bag, and adjusted the strap on his shoulder, preparing to move, though the air still carried the weight of being watched just a moment longer. Malik lifted the cable free from the port and began feeding it back into loose loops, not tight this time, just enough to keep it from dragging. The rubber brushed against the concrete in a softer rhythm than before. The overhead lights along the ramp stayed steady now, their glow even, almost quiet. Around him, the lot had resumed its pace, but not entirely. A few glances still lingered, shorter now, less obvious, but not gone. He set the coil on the lower shelf of the cart and pressed it flat with both hands, adjusting the edges until they aligned. His fingers paused there for a second, resting on the surface, before he straightened. The panel behind him gave a faint tick as it settled into place. Malik reached for the small tester, turned it once in his hand, then slid it back into the side pocket of his bag. He shifted the strap on his shoulder, rolling it slightly to ease the weight, then let his arm fall back to his side. A faint sound drew his attention, not loud, just out of place. A soft, uneven tap against glass. He turned his head slightly, not fully, just enough to trace the source. Clara's car sat where she had left it, but the rear door was not fully shut. It rested against the frame, not latched, moving a fraction with each passing breeze. Malik's gaze held there for a moment. The rest of the lot continued around him, but slower again, as if the sound had pulled a thin thread through the space. He did not move right away. His hand lifted halfway toward the cart, then stopped. A small pause. Not uncertainty, just a measure. He shifted his weight, then stepped toward the car, not directly, angling slightly, so his path did not cut through the center of the lot. Each step was even, unhurried. As he reached the rear door, he stopped just short of touching it, looking through the narrow gap into the back seat. The child seat was visible, its straps loose, one side twisted under the buckle, the base not fully secured against the seat. He let out a slow breath through his nose, barely visible. His hand hovered near the edge of the door, then lowered. Another brief pause. Then he opened it the rest of the way, careful not to let it swing. The hinge moved with a soft, controlled sound. He leaned in slightly, not stepping inside, just enough to reach the seat. His fingers moved with practiced precision, lifting the strap, threading it back through the guide, pulling it flat, removing the twist. He checked the latch, pressing it down until it clicked into place with a firm, quiet snap. He adjusted the base, shifting it an inch, then pressing down to test the stability. It held. He tugged once more, a short, firm pull, then released. The seat stayed aligned. Malik wiped his fingertips lightly against the edge of his cloth, then placed the cloth back in his pocket. He stepped back, closing the door slowly until it met the frame, guiding it the last inch so. It latched without sound. For a moment, he stood there, hands still near the handle, then let it drop. Across the lot, a conversation paused mid-sentence, then resumed at a lower volume. Clara had not moved far. She stood near the walkway, her posture unchanged, but her gaze no longer sweeping the space. It rested, briefly, on the rear of the car, not on him directly, on the door, on the line where it met the frame. Malik did not look toward her. He turned back to his cart, his steps the same as before, neither quicker nor slower. He picked up the cable again, adjusted one loop that had slipped out of line, and set it back into place. His movements returned to their earlier rhythm, steady, contained. The lot breathed around him, a little quieter than before, as if something small had shifted, though nothing had been said. Clara did not move right away. The rear door of the car sat flush now, the seam clean, uninterrupted. For a moment, she remained where she was, one hand resting lightly against the strap of her bag, her posture unchanged except for the slight angle of her head. The lot carried on around her, but slower, as if the rhythm had missed a beat and had not fully recovered. A man near the entrance reached for his keys, paused mid-motion, then continued with a quieter clink of metal. Clara stepped back toward the car, not directly, her path curving just enough to approach from the side. She reached for the rear door handle and opened it again, this time with a controlled, deliberate pull. The door moved smoothly, no resistance, no shift. She leaned in, her gaze settling on the child's seat. The straps lay flat now, aligned through the guides, the buckle centered. She pressed a hand against the base, testing it without force at first, then with more intention. It did not move. Her fingers traced the edge of the latch, stopping at the point where the plastic met the frame, as if confirming something that had not been there before. The movement slowed, then stopped entirely. For a second, she remained bent slightly forward, her reflection faint in the window. Behind her, the supervisor shifted his stance, watching without speaking, his attention no longer on the panel or the cable, but on the car, on her hand resting against the seat. A faint breeze moved through the lot, carrying a soft rustle from the trees beyond the fence. Clara straightened, but not fully. Her hand lingered on the door frame a moment longer than needed before she stepped back. The door stayed open. She did not close it. Instead, she turned, her gaze moving across the lot, not sweeping this time, but searching, slower, more precise. Malik was by the cart, adjusting the cable again, his focus on the line in front of him. He did not look up. The coil shifted under his hands, one loop sliding into place. Clara took a step in his direction, then another, her pace measured, not the sharp, even rhythm from before. The distance between them shortened, but she stopped several feet away, leaving a clear space between them. The supervisor glanced from her to Malik, then stepped back again, creating more room, as if sensing a boundary that had shifted without being named. Clara did not speak. She stood there, watching the way Malik lifted the cable, how he turned it once before setting it down, how his hands moved without hesitation, without checking for approval. A car door closed in the distance, the sound sharper than usual, then fading. Malik reached for the cloth on the cart, wiped his hands once, then folded it carefully along its worn lines. As he set it down, the edge of the fabric aligned exactly with the tray. His movements remained unchanged, steady, contained. Clara's gaze followed that motion, then shifted briefly toward the rear of her car, still open, the seat visible through the gap. For a moment, the 2 points held in the same line of sight, the car and the man, the small adjustment and the one who made it. The space between them carried that connection, quiet but present. Clara shifted her weight, the faint sound of her heel marking the change, but she did not step closer. Instead, she turned slightly, angling her body toward the car again, then paused, as if reconsidering the direction. The pause lasted just long enough to be noticed. Malik lifted the cable once more, adjusting the final loop, then placed it down and reached for the tester, sliding it into his bag. He did not look toward her. He did not change his pace. The consistency of it held the space steady. Clara took one more step, not toward him, but toward the line between them, then stopped. Her hand lifted slightly, then lowered again without gesture. Behind her, the supervisor exhaled softly, shifting his stance once more. The lot remained quieter than before, the sounds returning but at a lower level, as if held back. Clara turned back toward the car, walking the remaining distance, her pace still measured. She reached the open door and closed it this time, guiding it with a controlled push until it latched with a soft, precise click. The sound carried just enough to mark the moment. She stood there a second longer, her hand resting briefly on the door, then let it fall to her side. When she turned away again, her gaze did not sweep the lot as before. It settled briefly on Malik, not as a check, not as a dismissal, but as a point of recognition that had not been there earlier. Then she moved on, her steps quieter against the concrete, leaving the space behind her altered in a way that did not need to be explained. Clara's steps carried her a few yards past the car before they slowed again, not stopping completely this time, just easing enough to break the rhythm she had held all morning. She adjusted the strap of her bag once, then let her hand fall, her fingers brushing lightly against the side seam of her coat, as if recalibrating something she could not quite place. The lot had returned to its usual cadence, engines idling, doors opening and closing, voices threading back into the air without hesitation. Malik remained by the cart, finishing the last small adjustments, his attention fixed on the alignment of the tools, the cable resting flat, the cloth folded in the same position. He lifted the cart handle and rolled it forward a few inches, positioning it parallel to the curb, then stopped, checking the line against the edge of the concrete. Clara turned slightly, not fully facing him, but enough that her line of sight crossed his space again. She did not call out. Instead, she took a step back toward the car, slower than before, her pace no longer cutting through the space but moving within it. A passing assistant approached from the side, tablet in hand, already beginning to speak. Clara raised a hand just slightly, not dismissing, just delaying. The assistant paused mid-sentence, lowering the tablet a fraction, waiting. Clara's gaze shifted once more toward the rear of the car, then to Malik, then back again, the movement small but deliberate. Malik did not look up. He reached into the cart, picked up a pair of gloves, turned them inside out once, then set them back down, aligning the fingers neatly. The assistant shifted weight from one foot to the other, eyes moving between Clara and the car, then settling forward again, neutral. Clara walked the remaining distance to the vehicle and stopped beside the rear door, not touching it this time. She stood there, close enough to reach, but her hands remained at her sides. For a brief moment, she leaned slightly forward, as if considering opening it again, then straightened without doing so. The pause held just long enough to register before she turned back toward the assistant. "Reschedule the inspection for this afternoon," she said, her voice even, but softer than earlier, the edge reduced. The assistant nodded quickly, tapping the tablet, already adjusting the schedule. Clara did not move immediately after speaking. She remained in place, her posture still composed, but her stance less rigid, the angle of her shoulders no longer squared against the space. Across the lot, the supervisor resumed his earlier position near the entrance, hands no longer fixed on his hips, his attention drifting back to the building. A car pulled out slowly, its tires rolling over the concrete with a steady, familiar sound. Malik lifted the cart handle again and began to move, guiding it along the curb with a controlled, even pace. As he passed the rear of Clara's car, he did not turn his head, his path set, his focus on the line ahead. Clara's gaze followed the movement briefly, not lingering, just enough to track the shift. The assistant stepped slightly to the side to give him space, the motion automatic, unspoken. The space between them adjusted. Without friction, Clara turned once more toward the car, her hand lifting halfway before lowering again, choosing not to engage. Instead, she stepped back, allowing the distance to remain intact. The lot carried on, its rhythm steady, but lighter now, the earlier tension diffused into something quieter, not gone, but no longer pressing. Malik continued along the curb, the cart wheels turning with a soft, consistent sound, his movements unchanged, steady as before. Clara stood a moment longer, then turned toward the building, her steps resuming, but without the sharp insistence they had carried earlier. As she passed through the glass doors, the reflection caught her briefly, then released her back into the interior, leaving the lot behind in a state that had shifted, subtly, but unmistakably. The lot settled into a steady afternoon rhythm, the earlier tightness thinning into something more ordinary. A few cars came and went, doors closing with familiar weight, engines starting without hesitation. Malik moved along the curb, guiding the cart toward the side entrance, his pace even, the wheels tracing a straight line along the edge of the concrete. He paused once near the doorway, adjusting the strap on his shoulder before reaching out to push the door open with his elbow. The glass reflected him briefly, then cleared as he stepped inside. Outside, Clara reappeared from the building a few minutes later, a thin folder in her hand. She walked toward the car again, but slower this time, her steps measured without the sharp cadence from earlier. A driver from another department passed by and nodded slightly. She returned it with a small, almost absent tilt of her head, not breaking stride. When she reached the car, she stopped beside the rear door. For a moment, she did not touch it. Her gaze lowered to the handle, then shifted to the window, catching a faint reflection of the seat inside. The pause held, quiet and contained. She opened the door, just enough to look in, then leaned in slightly, her hand resting on the frame. The seat remained as it had been, straps flat, centered, secure. She pressed the base once, not testing this time, just confirming. Her fingers lingered on the edge for a brief second before she stepped back. As she closed the door, she guided it carefully, slowing the final inch so it met the frame without a sound. The motion was small, but deliberate. A colleague approached from the side, mid-conversation, beginning to speak. Clara lifted her hand again, not to stop him this time, but to hold the moment just long enough. She glanced once more toward the maintenance area, where Malik had disappeared inside, then turned back. "We will keep the current team on the account," she said, her tone even, settled, the decision placed without emphasis. The colleague nodded, adjusting his notes, already moving on. Clara rested her hand briefly on the roof of the car, the same place as before, but her fingers did not brush or check this time. They simply stayed, still for a second, before she let them fall. The lot moved around her, unbroken now, voices returning to their normal cadence, footsteps steady, attention dispersed. She walked around to the driver's side and got in, closing the door with that same controlled, quiet motion. The engine started, low and smooth. As the car pulled away, it passed the side entrance just as Malik stepped back out, a clipboard in hand, his expression unchanged, his focus already on the next task. He did not look toward the road. The car slowed for a fraction of a second as it crossed the exit line, then continued on. The sunlight shifted across the pavement, catching the edge of the cable coil still resting neatly on the cart, its loops aligned, undisturbed. If something in this moment stayed with you, you can share it quietly. Thanks for being here.